Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Sapna Dadwal. I'm working as a professor in the Department of Management of St. Andrew's Institute of Technology and Management. Today I'm going to give you lecture 2 of unit 1 of consumer protection. This is the subject which is taught in BBA 6th semester. In the first lecture I've discussed few topics of unit 1. Now, in this lecture, I'm going to discuss consumer buying motives and types of consumer buying motives, doctrine of caveat emptor and its exceptions, and doctrine of caveat vendito. In the first lecture, I've discussed consumer buying motives. I gave you very brief introduction of consumer buying motives. In this lecture, I am going to discuss in detail what are consumer buying motives and what are its types. So, consumer behavior basically starts with needs. Needs may be of different types at different point of time. The needs hierarchy as given by Abraham Maslow classifies the needs into 5 types: basic needs, safety needs, social needs, esteem need, and self actualization need. A person moves from one level need to another. As one need is satisfied, he moves on to the next need. It is for this need that consumer shows some behavior pattern. When a need is sufficiently aroused, it becomes a motive. In the words of William J. Stanton, he points out that a motive is a need sufficiently stimulated to move an individual to seek satisfaction. Very clear from this definition that motive stimulate or need stimulate a people to buy, because a need wants to satisfy if there is a need, people want to satisfy it, so this becomes motive to buy something. He further adds that the motive become buying motive when the individual seeks satisfaction through purchasing of something. Yes, very clear from this definition. I have already discussed it. So according to TJ Durian, buying motives are those influences or consideration which provide the impulse to induce action, or determine choice in the purchase of goods and services. Now, consumer buying motives. Buying motives are those motives of consumers which are sufficiently stimulated so as to induce the consumer to buy the product. These are the needs which are pressing needs, causing anxiety and restlessness to the customers. So much so that the consumers has to make effort to buy a suitable product. So buying motive is a motive which can be satisfied by the purchase of the commodity. It is very clear from this what consumer buying motive is. What does it mean? What is the definition of consumer buying motives? So buying motives can be grouped into different levels. First, when the need is recognized by the buyer, he talks about the motives for buying the product. He's conscious. His conscious start thinking about the product. Second level is the buyer is convinced that he has need to buy, but is not in a position to understand the motive. There is in subconscious mind. So there is need, but he is not able to understand it. What he wants to buy. So then the last is buyer is not in a position to explain the factors which influences their purchase decision, unconscious. So mainly consumer buying motives are of 2 types. First one is product motives. Product motives are those motives which are related to the product that induce the consumer to buy the product. So product motives are those motives which are related to the product that induce the consumer to buy the product. So product motives may relate to different attributes of the products. These product motives can be further classified as emotional product motives, rational product motives, and operational product motives. The fourth one is socio-psychological motives. So I'm starting with emotional product motives. Emotional product motives are those which invoke a person emotionally so that he buys the product without analyzing and evaluating its various attributes. Example of emotional product motives are love, pride, fear, comfort, ego, habits, etc. Here consumer has the motive of only buying the product because he is emotionally attached to it. He has a habit of buying it. For example, cigarette or alcohol. So this is an emotional product motive. These are examples of emotional product motive. Now the second one is rational product motives. Rational product motives are motives which are concerned with logical analysis of various aspects of the product. Here the consumer makes a rational evaluation of different products attributes so as to determine its want satisfying potential. Only then he buys the product. The various utility attribute of the product like credit facilities, transportation facilities, utilities are included in this. So consumer buy after a logical analysis. He buy product or after logical analysis. After looking after the product, its utilities, its other facilities. Then there comes operational product motives. Operational product motive refers to the satisfaction derived from the function or physical utility of the product. So more efficiently the functions are performed, and more the function performed, better are the chances of product being purchased. So these products are purchased on the basis of physical utility of the product. For example, if somebody wants to buy a car, then this car buying a car is an operational product motive. Then socio-psychological motives. Socio-psychological motives are different from operational motives. Here the consumer buys the product because of the prestige attached to it. The product here is evaluated on the basis of social status and prestige. It must satisfy the psychological need of the buyer of having product which is perceived high by the society. For example, buying of diamonds or luxury cars or whenever people buy these things, they buy it. Their motive is of socio-psychological motives. Then the second category of consumer buying motives are patronage. Second is patronage motive. Patronage motive refers to those motives which make a consumer buy from particular shop. Many times consumers have reason to buy the goods from a particular shop only. So the patronage of that shop attracts him. So patronage motive may also be classified as emotional patronage motive, then rational patronage motive. Now emotional patronage motive. Many times the buyer buys goods from a specific shop for the reason not clear to them also. Such motives are called as emotional patronage motive. Here the reason for buying from that shop is purely subjective. Each buyer may have his own personal reason. So they are thinking emotionally. So they're not buying that they get good quality goods from that shop. They're buying it for other reason, maybe personal reasons are there. Then comes rational patronage motive. So rational patronage motives are the logical reason that a consumer has for buying the goods from a particular shop only. The consumer is aware of the advantage of that shop in terms of wide variety of goods, wide selection, good quality, easy availability, good behavior of salesmen, after sale service, etc. And therefore he is attached to that shop. So he is buying from that shop not because of emotional patronage motive. He is buying from rational because of the benefit attached to that shop. So benefit he is getting from that shop. Now the next topic is doctrine of Cavett emptor. So, caveat emptor is a Latin phrase that translates to let the buyer be aware. The doctrine of caveat emptor is an integral part of the Sale of Goods Act. It translates to let the buyer beware. This meant it lays the responsibility of their choice on the buyers themselves. This doctrine says that the seller will not be responsible for the buying for the buying of seller will not be responsible for the goods by the buyer. The buyer himself is responsible for the choice he has made. So the doctrine attempts to make the buyer more conscious of his choices. It is the duty of the buyer to check the quality and the usefulness of the product he is purchasing. If the product turns out to be defective or does not live up to his potential or his expectations, then seller will not be held responsible for this. So doctrine of caveat emptor says that only buyer is responsible for the goods or for the choices he is making in his buying. Example, A bought a horse from B. A wanted to enter the horse in a race. Turns out that the horse was not capable of running a race on the account of being lame. But A did not inform B of his intention. So B will not be held responsible for the defects of the horse. So doctrine of caveat emptor, here the doctrine of caveat emptor will apply. Now there are exceptions to the doctrine of caveat emptor. For example, the first one is fitness of the product for the buyer's purpose. When the buyer informs the seller of his purpose of buying the goods, it is implied that he is relying on the seller's judgment. So it is the duty of the seller then to ensure the goods match their desired uses. For example, A goes to buy a bicycle. He informs B he wants to use the cycle for mountain trekking. If B sells him an ordinary bicycle, then that is incapable of fulfilling A's purpose, the seller will be responsible. In this case, B is responsible. Here, the doctrine of caveat emptor principle will not apply. The second exception is goods purchased under brand name. So, when the buyer buys a product under a trade name or a branded product, the seller cannot be held responsible for the usefulness or quality of the product. So there is no implied condition that the goods will be fit for the purpose the buyer intended. So when he is purchasing under brand name, then the seller is responsible, not buyer. Then this is an exception to the doctrine of caveat emptor. Then third, goods sold by descriptions. So when the buyer buys the goods based on the description, there will be an exception. If the goods do not match the description, then in such a case the seller will be responsible for the goods. So then this is the case of exception to doctrine of caveat emptor. Then comes goods of mercantile quality. Section 16(2) deals with exception of mercantile qualities. The section states that the seller who is selling goods by description has a duty of providing goods of mercantile quality, capable of passing the market standards. So if the goods are not marketable quality, then the buyer will not be the one who is responsible. It will be the seller's responsibility. However, if the buyer has had reasonable chance to examine the product, then this exception will not apply. Then next one is sale by sample. If the buyer buys his goods after examining a sample, then the rule of doctrine of caveat emptor will not apply. If the rest of the goods do not resemble the sample, the buyer cannot be held responsible. In this case, the seller will be the one who is responsible. So this is again exception to the doctrine of caveat emptor, which says, let the buyer beware. For example, A places an order for 50 toy cars with B. He checks one sample with the car where the car is red. The rest of the car turns out of orange color. Here the doctrine will not apply and B will be held responsible. Now the next one is Sale by description and sample. Yes, if the sale is done by sample as well as description of the product, the buyer will not be responsible. If the goods do not resemble the sample or the description, then the responsibility will fall squarely on the equally on the seller, or all the responsibility will fall on the seller. Then this is the exception to the doctrine of Caveat emptor. Now the next is uses of trade. If there is an implied condition of warranty about the quality or the fitness of goods or products, but if a seller deviated from this, then the rules of caveat emptor ceases to apply. For example, A bought goods from B in an auction of the contents of a ship, but B did not inform A the contents were sea damaged, and so the rules of doctrine will not apply here. Then fraud or misrepresentation by the seller. This is another important exception. If the seller obtains the consent of the buyer by fraud, then caveat emptor will not apply. Also, if the seller conceals any material defect of the goods which are later discovered on closer examination, then again the buyer will not be responsible. In both cases, the seller will be guilty party. So this is again the exception to the doctrine of caveat emptor. Now next is doctrine of caveat vendito. This is the opposite of caveat emptor. Caveat vendito is a Latin term which means let the seller beware. In simple words, mean that it is the seller who is responsible to beware of the goods being exchanged under the sales transaction. And if any defect, deficiency or problem is discovered subsequent to the transaction, then seller will be responsible for it, not the buyer. Also, it is the seller who should remain vigilant, as his lack of knowledge may allow customers to get undue benefit from the seller. Therefore, the seller must make sure that he takes every necessary step that he is not held liable for any problem found in the goods. Although he can limit his liability by clearly stating it to the buyer that he will not be responsible for any problem in the goods once sold. By saying it, he can limit his responsibility. Then if he says this to the buyer, then buyer becomes responsible. And from the last few decades, there is a major change in the customers and suppliers' right, especially because e-commerce, where buyer is more protected, and now the principle of caveat vendito is getting more and more popular and common than doctrine of caveat emptor. So these are questions from the above lecture of different slides. If there is any query regarding the above slides, the above topics, you can always contact me. If there is any typing mistake, then I am saying extremely sorry for that. Thank you.